Welcome, everyone. Dear listeners, you're listening to No Name Podcast. A very quick disclaimer: we are not associated or no relationship with NSA and their upcoming No Such podcast. If you were searching for No Such podcast and you end up listening to No Name Podcast, so yeah, it's not the same one. However, we discuss lots of interesting topics in cybersecurity, and you may be interested in this episode, in our past episodes, and upcoming episodes as well. So today we have a special guest, a special interview with Daryna Antoniuk. She's a reporter for Recorded Future News based in Ukraine. She writes about many cybersecurity startups and, of course, about cyber warfare in Eastern Europe and Russian attacks on Ukraine. She previously was also tech reporter for Forbes Ukraine. She also worked in Kyiv Independent and Kyiv Post. So I think, yeah, we'll hear from Daryna about her background more. And we have Vlad, the main host and owner of the podcast here as well. Okay, so welcome
Hello,
our guest.
everyone.
Hi.
Hello, Daryna. How are you doing? Thanks for
Hi.
joining.
I'm great. Thanks for having me. Just hope that our internet connection will be stable, as I'm based in Kyiv and we have blackouts and power outages. So yeah, let's just hope for stable podcast.
That's all we can do.
Fingers crossed, right? So we are very excited to have a professional reporter and journalist here. So yeah, we actually, honestly, we were a little bit nervous, given that we are amateur podcasters here. So I guess, yeah, if you can start by telling us a bit about your professional path. So how you ended up writing about cybersecurity.
So before getting into cyber, I was a tech reporter, mostly writing about startups and venture investment and tech companies and all this stuff. And just for the record, I never was a tech savvy person. I think the only reason I got into this field was because I read a lot of science fiction books as a child. And with cyber, the story is more interesting. Someone recommended to me a podcast called Darknet Diaries, and I became literally obsessed with it. I listened to every single episode, and that is basically how I became interested in cyber. Then I read a lot of books, like all the classics, Countdown to Zero and Sandworm and Spam Nation. And I started covering this for Forbes and the Kyiv Independent, and it all coincided with all the events in Ukraine, which were very cyber related. It was before the war, a few months before the war, when Ukraine was already attacked by Russian hackers, and Ukraine started speaking more publicly about this. And then someone from the Record or Recorded Future News noticed my stories, and they hired me first as freelancer. I was writing for them several stories a month, and now I work for them full-time, writing up to 4 stories a day, and I'm very excited working for them.
Good for them.
Nice.
What can I say? Yeah, it's really heartwarming to see high quality tech content that is both relevant and well written in such a well recognized outlet. That was my impression, because I think I met you before the record, right?
Yes.
And it's already been a very interesting fact, because I'm very skeptical, and the listeners will know it. Alex knows it too. I don't know if I told you so, but I'm exceptionally skeptical about the level of Ukrainian technical journalism, and I express my skepticism regularly. And in the last few years, the situation worsened because the people who were like good at it, they're busy with other stuff. like many of us nowadays. So yeah, it's crazy cool that somehow we have you to keep up and yeah, put Ukraine on the map of cyber journalism. That's great. Thank you for that.
Really appreciate it.
I would honestly add, like from my point of view, that international level of international journalism in cybersecurity questions. Also, I have lots of questions for that, and you're doing a great job. Yeah, Daryna. So.
Thanks.
So that's in other words, we mostly agree with what you write. So tell us more about how you come up with the topics, with the stories.
Well, they always come from reality. Now it's not that hard to find a cyber story. Like, I never struggle finding people to write about or topics to write about. At first, when I started working for The Record, I thought, like, how would I come up with so many cyber-related stories? Because tech coverage, it's more broad. You can cover startups, you can cover tech companies. But it turned out that so many things happen in cyber every single day. And it's not just technical stuff. It's politics, it's business, it's economics, it's science. So I'm never short of stories that I can write about. My main zone of interest and what I write about the most are cyber attacks in Eastern Europe, cyber war in Ukraine. Sometimes I cover technical reports about different malware samples, just because I like to read all these complicated reports and make them simpler and more readable for wider audience. So yeah, that's basically it.
What does help you? Just, I don't know, maybe some cautionary tale, how not to get into this kind of job. Vice versa, how do you get into there? So what skill set is like the necessary checklist of what you need to learn and maybe even perfect before you start in this path?
Some people may disagree, but I think the most important thing is to know how to tell the story in a simple and engaging language, but without losing all the important technical aspects. Because cybersecurity professionals and all tech people in general, they usually speak in this complicated language. They use a lot of abbreviations. When I got into cyber, it was all about understanding what is behind those 3 letters or 4-letter abbreviations. They use a lot of numbers and a string of codes in their reports. And as a journalist, you don't have to repeat word to word what are written in those reports. You have to analyze them. You have to process all the information, gather as much information as possible, talk to as many people as possible, and try to explain it in a simple language. You should always ask yourself, so what's the story? Even if you're covering an extremely technical report, there's often an opportunity to find an engaging story behind all these indicators of compromise and strings of code described in the report. So yeah, for me, journalism and cyber journalism in particular, it's about telling the story, but compared to other fields of journalism, it's also very important to be precise and technical, but in a way that is engaging. And it's possible if you are doing it for a long time and if you're getting to know the topic.
Sounds logical and reasonable to me. Did you take or could you recommend anything to read, or like courses on storytelling or something, or it just came naturally to you?
I hate courses on storytelling.
I took one. I know what you're talking about.
I don't know, all these classes about... There are several really good books. One of them is on writing well. It's like a masterpiece for all the writers and journalists. And some of others, I don't really remember. It's just, for me, it came from reading. I read tons of books as a child, and I continue reading. I read a lot of good articles from journalists I admire, and this is just, you hear the language, you feel the language, you start using the language. Of course, for me, it's different because I'm writing not in my native language, but because English language journalism is a bit different from Ukrainian journalism, it's actually easier for me to write in English than in Ukrainian, because the structure of the story is more clear to me.
So kids, read more books.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Alex, what we got next?
Yeah, I guess my question would be a little bit, maybe we can jump to this discussion, right? That my understanding is that most of our listeners, they got used like to all these technical reports, you know, like white papers, research blogs, right, from different security vendors or maybe academic papers. So you already mentioned like the difference is, you know, you're trying to capture something that wider audience will understand. But on the other hand, I think there are like more additional things that you need to research, like again, like this context in terms of geopolitics, right? Maybe some understanding of impact of your story, right? For example, in Western cybersecurity articles, right, you can find these end of the world type of stories about DDoS attack that lasted maybe 2 hours, but still it's a crazy story, right? So could you tell us a little bit more, right? Anything more than just cybersecurity technical aspects that you need?
Yeah, 100%. As I mentioned before, cybersecurity is not just technical aspects. It's in politics, it's in economy, it's in business, it's everywhere. And sometimes people forget about it. So I was admitted to Chicago Business School last year, and they had a program for business journalists, and I was the only tech reporter whom they accepted because I managed to convince them that cyber is also business and that you can contribute a lot to business discussions, even as a cyber reporter, because it's such an important part of this field. So yeah, knowing context is very important. Knowing background is very important. For instance, you cannot report about cyber attacks or internet disruptions in Bangladesh without knowing that about the protests that happened there. Same applies to Russia and Ukraine. That's why I usually choose to cover Eastern European region, like Ukraine and Russia and Belarus, also our neighboring countries like Poland, because I know the context so well. I can understand the language. I can read local media, and it's much easier for me to understand what could be behind the attacks, what could be the motivation of hackers. And as for end of the world DDoS attacks you mentioned, we have a special policy at the Record about covering those kind of stories. Like the simplest thing you can do when you see the statement about the DDoS attack is go check the website that was attacked. It's as simple as that, but trust me, a lot of media, especially in Ukraine, they don't do that. And usually I choose to cover the stories if I see the statement from the victim, or if the impact of the attack was prolonged, like lasted for several days. For instance, we see reports about Russian banks being attacked almost all the time, but we rarely hear from banks themselves. But last month, like almost 10 banks issued statements that they suffer from a prolonged distributed denial of service attack, which originated from abroad. So I choose to cover those kind of stories. And as for defacement attacks, well, sometimes we choose to cover those that are kind of fun, like when the images that were placed on the website meant something or corresponded to the event which happened around the same time. But yeah, this low sophistication attacks, hackers can use them to gain media attention. So journalists have to be especially careful not to give those hackers too much coverage, because sometimes it's beneficial for them.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, go ahead.
It's fine. It's funny you mentioned the statements of Russian entities under attack. Just in my understanding, Russians are really good at covering up any like negative news sources. So events become non-events and are like degraded or like literally covered up and just do not get into any sort of how to say it. I almost said public sphere, but yeah, as long as Russia doesn't have one, like do not get to any like type of audience. They manage to cover. They still manage to somewhat cover up the things that are going on the ground. So Russians keep complaining that they do not understand what's going on in Kursk Oblast. It's funny by itself, but just taking it into account, isn't it a bit like different when it comes to Russia and most probably Belarus? Yeah, to actually get factual information because of these specifics, and if it's true, how is it possible to circumvent that cultural specific?
So usually it happens like that, especially with like DDoS attacks or more sophisticated disruptive attacks. Users of certain banks or certain services, they go to Telegram or Reddit or other websites to complain.
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
What was that?
I don't know. Is it fine now?
Yeah, we can hear.
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Then local media, especially those that describe themselves as independent, they notice these complaints and they go public with them. And sometimes those companies that are suspected of being attacked, they react to it. Sometimes not. But yeah, you are right. When you cover Russia and Belarus or any other dictatorship state, you have to be very careful about all the information which is issued by local authorities or state control companies or even private businesses. You always have to take it with a grain of salt. But I don't usually, like, especially working for the international media, I am more flexible in covering Russian market because I know that Ukrainian journalists, they do not reach out to Russian experts or companies. They do not usually cite Russian media in like stories which are like where they don't have to write like Russia complain about power outages or Russia complain about attacks or something like that. But in more less war-related stories, I can say that. I read a lot of Russian media. I try to follow Russian experts and read the reports by Russian cyber companies. And I have a reason for that. When the war started, a lot of Western cybersecurity companies left Russian market and they don't have visibility into their networks. So basically, the only information we can get about cyber attacks in Russia, like attacks on Russian companies, is from Russia itself. Of course, we cannot trust 100% what Kaspersky or FACCT are saying, but it's at least some piece of knowledge which we can use to explain what's happening in Russia. And usually when I cover stories like that, I try to go to Western experts and ask if they are familiar either with a hacker group, which is described by Kaspersky or any other group, or if they are familiar with TTPs used by this group. And sometimes I get lucky. Like, I think it was a month ago, I covered a report by Kaspersky about allegedly Chinese hacker group called Cloud Sorcerer. It attacked Russian companies. And around the same time, the US-based Proofpoint published their report. Actually, it was a tweet with some indicators of compromise about the group which use the same techniques and procedures as cloud sources. And it is suspected to be the same group. So sometimes you are lucky and you can find like correlation between Russian reports and US or European reports. So basically, to summarize, I got into too many details, I think, with this.
No, that's fine.
I think it's
We like
important.
it.
Yeah.
I think it's important to try to understand your enemy rather than avoid it. But you also have to be very careful while reporting on this. And like, this is the golden rule in journalism. You, especially in cyber journalism, where everything is so secretive and obscure, you need to explain to your reader what you know and what you don't know. If you cover a report by Kaspersky, you have to mention that like it was sanctioned or its CEO was sanctioned, why it was sanctioned, why US want to ban its products. You have to explain that Western companies left the market, and that's why we cover the reports by Russians. All of these aspects are important. Usually it's like a sentence or a paragraph, but it gives reader a context, so it have more details to make their own opinion about the topic. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
That
even
sounds
nervous.
cool.
Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
No, I'm just trying to process it on the background because it's it never came to me that you actually working under this much stress, because you just have to touch this part of the network and these individuals.
Oh, there are so many interesting things you can find there. Like, because I know the context.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, because I know under what circumstances most of the Russian media work in. Like, it's just fun sometimes to browse through all those stories.
Yeah, observing them suffering, I guess.
I was thinking of some alternative to хлопок in cyberspace. I think a lot. We need to come up with some.
What's that?
Ну, хлопок.
What would it be? Что же случилось?
Some kind of bubble in cyberspace. I don't know.
Bubble? It's
Sounds like that.
Lollipop.
We need to find some analogies.
Bubble tea.
Yep.
Yeah. So from the nation that mastered euphemism as a national trait, I think we should stop at that. So what I wanted to ask you, I didn't write it down, but see that is touching the similar topic in the notes. So I just learned. It's been some time since I learned, but it's still fresh in my mind that there is a very strict correlation between technical sophistication of an incident and the amount of reaction to it in the media. So there was a study that showed that nothing raises interest of an audience to a cyber incident better than use of some highly sophisticated technical exploit or new technique or something like that. From your experience, does it seem true? Because as a person who produces a lot of content on the topic and who is I suspect interested in how this content does, well, not so well, what touches, what doesn't, so how is it accepted, what's the statistics and so on. Would you agree?
No, my favorite stories to cover are cyber attacks on energy infrastructure, because they are sophisticated, they are well planned, and usually they have a lot of impact, especially in Ukraine. But I like to cover them not because they are sophisticated, but because the sophisticated language used in these reports usually follows the complicated and well-planned attack, which have a lot of impact. So maybe it's not just about language, but about the attack it describes. I mean, like, the more sophisticated the attack, the more likely it is that it would be damaging and would entail more impact. And that's why it raises a lot of media attention. I don't know. I never a lot of reports about attacks are complicated, but it's not like I choose to cover the most complicated ones.
So
What
we
is
have a gap here, a gap to fill. No, the
Yeah.
more related something is to Ukrainian energy sector, the higher are chances for something as obscure as Прикарпаття Обленерго to pop up in the text, which is complicated enough for an average Western reader. So.
Oh yeah, spelling the name of Ukrainian power station is something.
Yeah, Ukrainian toponyms are not for them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
regarding
thank you for clearing
sophistication,
it out.
yeah, maybe some kind of concrete example follow up here. So let's say like several sources report like, like we received 1,000 attacks, right? Or another source says like we received like, 100,000 attacks. So how do you usually unify this data? Because I think this is a kind of very big open problem in all this reporting, because it's unclear what they count as unique attack, right, in all these numbers. So if you see different sources with different numbers, is there any process how to unify, what was the impact? Or what criteria to use, like how to report it, whether it was sophisticated or it was medium impact, high impact, or something like that?
Yeah, I usually ask how they count the attacks, or if it's like a DDoS attack, are they talking about the request per second or what, or the number of IP addresses?
It doesn't matter. There are many of them. Millions.
Millions,
Does it matter?
terabyte DDoS. Yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes the higher number you mention in the report, the more likely people think that it's like sophisticated or something. I don't think I ever like encountered a situation where I was confused about that, because if I see the report or a news item that is obviously clickbait and which are trying to play on the number, I try to avoid that or go directly to source, and usually sources are those who are telling the exact numbers. Not always, of course, but it is more likely that I will get information from them, which is not that confusing, and I can work with it. And of course, I can ask third-party companies if they have some visibility or if they have previous experience of working with similar incidents.
I guess that leads like to an interesting question, right? So it looks like you need to do some more additional work, right? Usually to analyze context, to dig deeper. Is there like any, at the same time, I think you need to report very fast, right? So how do you solve this balance, right? Or are there any kind of policies that, okay, we did enough in this amount of time, so we have to publish, right, already some story? Or, like what is the criteria here?
Yeah, it depends.
I was surprised to learn that deadline is a term that first was born in this industry, not in IT.
It depends on the story we are covering. Some stories where there are a lot of public information available about it and all the context is clear, we can just go and publish it. But if there are questions we want to ask other people, we wait, we go to those people, we wait for their answers, or sometimes we publish the story and then they send us comments, we add them to the story. And it's easier for the record because we focus just on one topic, cyber, and all of the reporters have their own like beats. For instance, I mostly cover Eastern Europe, and my colleague cover US market. Another of my colleagues covered data privacy and spyware. So it's easier for us just to focus on one thing and to help each other if they don't have time for dealing with other stories. But it's not like I don't feel as much pressure working for the record right now as I felt when I worked for Ukrainian media, because it was very fast paced and because I could cover Ukrainian oligarchs in 1 minute and write about new blockchain startup in another just because tech wasn't a big priority. So I have to cover other stuff as well. now I can just focus on one thing. I know people I can go to ask questions, so it saves me a lot of time.
Problem solved.
It sounds easy, but honestly, it feels not. Yes. Looks like,
Very
yeah.
busy.
Looks like you need special skills for that. So one question then maybe also about this reporting versus journalism, right? Is there such a thing, right? And for example, again, like this recent case with arrest of Pavel Durov, right, this head of Telegram. I think there are many things you can write about it, right? Being a kind of cybersecurity professional, right? All subjective opinions, all speculations, conspiracy theories, and so on. So do you go into that depths or you just report, right?
I prefer to report, not to form opinions. I know that journalism is considered a very impactful job, and it is, but it's not that journalists deliberately decide to have certain impact on their readers. It's just we provide facts and as much information as possible and assume that our readers are smart enough to form their own opinion. And the more facts you provide and the clearer they are, the more likely that readers or listeners will actually form the opinion about the topic. As for Durov, and like in general, when you write about cyber, you always write about people who hack, who extort money, who breach the networks of hospitals, who create not very encrypted messaging apps. So we consider many of them bad guys. But in my reporting, I cannot call them bad guys. I can just explain what they do, what are the implications of that, and what are the like details and background and context where they are working. And I think that's good enough to provide all of that, because it's not a simple job to get all these facts. And I do not write opinions on certain topics. And writing for international media changes your perspective a little bit, because the language we use is less emotional than those by many Ukrainian media. For instance, we cannot say that like those bastards were hacked or something like that in our Telegram channel, social media. So you have to stay very objective, and sometimes even you have to sacrifice part of your patriotism, especially when you cover stories like about corruption in state agencies or layoffs in state agencies. But these are important stories and you have to cover them, even though their impact can be negative to Ukraine.
Yeah, that reminds me of academic writing, and honestly, my kind of technical research blogs versus academic writing is that you use just less passive voice in in these articles. In academia, yeah, you can write like different complicated sentences. But do you think like so this is a benefit of recorded future, right? Recorded future news, I guess, as kind of international independence, so that you can kind of view and report objectively on all the matters. And do you have kind of, are there any ties, because Recorded Future also has, you know, cybersecurity company and so on, like, is it like independent entity, or, you know, could you tell us a little bit more about kind of standards in Recorded Future News?
Yeah, it's fully independent. And we, even if we ask comments from our own researchers, just because they know the topic so well, we always add a disclaimer that the record is owned by Recorded Future, but we are editorially independent. And yeah, it's always like that. We never abuse this. So this is basically, there's nothing else to share.
Sounds like a hard work to do, at least to me.
to
Yeah,
stay.
It's stressful. It sounds stressful.
it's stressful. It's complicated. It's it's a lot of it demands a lot of mental energy.
Are we talking
because
about
you
journalism
basically
right
have
now?
yeah, exactly,
Oh yeah,
because
it
you
is.
just staying objective is quite yeah, it's quite a hard task, I guess, because you have to rationalize everything you do. You just cannot express opinions and yeah, act as a like regular human being. You have to focus on the factuals and avoid counterfactuals. That's kind of hard.
Yeah,
Sounds
but
like an audit work to me.
Yeah, I'm fascinated because again, like in academia, you also try to kind of have all these facts, right, and elaborate and don't have
Mhm.
opinions that much. Of course, you still have to sell the papers and so on to reviewers, but you have months for that, right? So usually it takes, half a year
Yeah,
to publish a paper. So here you really need, to do it fast on time with some kind of balance. Yeah, that's very fascinating.
because most probably in 3 days, no one will be talking about
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
all the
Yeah,
wonders
it's-
of journalism.
sounds like a lot of work to me. Okay.
That's why we have
Uh,
such a high burnout rate in this industry. Because it's very
yeah.
fast-paced, very intense. A lot of things happen all the time at the same time around the clock, and
Mhm.
you have to be
Mhm.
aware of all of them.
One related follow-up, so we can move here. I guess we touched this a little bit, but in terms of this cultural aspect. So one thing, especially, in the beginning of full-scale invasion, and of course, like before that, one thing that we saw is many of these news outlets or many experts, actually, like technical experts, they don't have this cultural understanding of, Russia, of Ukraine, of what's going on, what's happening. They keep calling, keep writing Kyiv as Kiev and so on, right? Or they kept use for a while conflict in Ukraine instead of Russia-Ukraine war. So do you see like any change in Western media, right, in Western reporting in terms of these kind of aspects?
Actually, yes, I see less and less incorrect spelling of Kyiv or Odessa, other cities. Like especially in media, I read maybe some other, they still spell it incorrectly. And those journalists who call the war in Ukraine a conflict, they're usually cancelled on Twitter by Ukrainians, and hopefully in the future they don't make the same mistake. As for cyber industry, like maybe it's just my assumption, but a lot of good cyber related coverage come from liberal leaning, left leaning media outlets, and their stance towards Ukraine and Russia are more or less clear. And for them, Russia and Russian hackers are this big evil, which they portray as a big brother from USSR. So they still sometimes in line with this, and they are more loyal to Ukraine and usually portray Russia as an enemy. So I don't really see this like conflicts in opinions in my industry and among my colleagues. Of course, Western journalists and Western researchers, they lack our context. And it's okay because we lack context of other countries as well. That's why it's important to work with people on the ground. For instance, my colleagues from our podcast, the Records podcast, Click Here, when they were reporting about Kyiv and Ukraine, they came to Kyiv, they stayed here for a week during the intense missile strike, and they had like tons interviews with local experts. They experienced Kyiv from inside, and they could report about it, and they could explain more what's happening here. So yeah, if you like context about Ukraine, just meet another Ukrainian and talk to him or her. that's my advice.
Are there any like still to-dos to increase like this positive impact of reporting cybersecurity events, especially related to Ukraine? So do you think like we need more articles, more publishing, or kind of any standards of any particular things that Ukrainian journalists can improve in reporting cybersecurity events?
This is a complicated question because, as I mentioned before, journalism in itself journalists cannot decide to have positive or negative impact. They can just report what they see. The more they see, the more they report. The less they see, the less they report. They don't choose to report more to have positive impact. What I personally noticed when the war started, Ukraine was all over the media, especially in cyber. It was easier to arrange interviews. It was easier to talk to people. Now it's changing, especially over the past few months. It got really hard to arrange an interview with a cybersecurity official or any digital official, basically. And so it's hard to get Ukraine into Western media back again. And we all understand that it's done deliberately. It's like the policy someone chose not to be in media as much. So, of course, like usually there is nothing you can do about it. You can get unofficial information from the sources, but of course you cannot always work with it. So sometimes you just have to wait and see what's happened next, because again, cyber is so secretive and so many things here are not discussed, and for a good reason, especially in a wartime. We know about national security, and media reporting can disrupt operations. But as a journalist, you just work with your facts and you think about what Vlad said is the hardest, objectivity, and try not to think about like positive, negative impact.
I think key questions here then, like if you want to increase like what you see, are there any like to-dos for reporters, for journalists, right? Do you need to proactively go to I don't know, like potential targets of cyber attacks, or maybe dig into whatever cybersecurity events? So how can you increase what you see? Yeah.
Oh yeah. So this is like, I know that in the US it's more common to have like coffee with people working in the industry and discuss what's happening with them. Like before the war, Ukraine had more like this press breakfast with some agencies or companies who wanted to explain what's happening in their industry. Now you have to reach out to them themselves. For instance, if you know that energy industry is attacked or telecom operators are attacked, you can approach them even before the actual big attack happened and ask like, how many incidents did you suffer this month, or what is the situation with your networks in terms of like the presence of hackers? Of course, it's not very likely that you receive a response, but sometimes you do. Sometimes you even get actual numbers. But yeah, especially during the wartime, you have to be very proactive and reach out to people themselves. Otherwise, you should just report what you get from press releases from state agencies, which is not fun at all. We don't like press releases.
I guess
It's
like maybe such
interesting.
very okay, go ahead, Vlad. Yeah.
Just staying on point that it got harder. There are like there is an explanation for that. With Ukraine tried to wage war more openly, and it didn't work out well. So now the overall strategy has shifted, and we saw the results. So it's too soon to jump into any conclusions, but the overall impact, the positive impact on morale, on the shift in global discourse and in like diplomatic prepositioning for possible talks if they ever occur. It played out pretty well, you know. So of course, in exchange for an ultimate sacrifice of lives of the soldiers, but yeah, in comparison to what resulted in a more open culture, strategic culture, I would say, last year, it stands out. So that might be one explanation. But do you think that people simply just got more discouraged to share any details because they just are somehow, I don't know, maybe disappointed in going public with what's really happening? Because you know, just I do not associate it with like things are going completely wrong, everything is bad, and we just have to keep it a secret, because I know that's not the fact. Yeah, but people are much more closed when it comes to sharing the details. Could it be explained by them just, you know, being a little bit tired of just presenting these facts, translating them, moving them westward, and making them like known and observed, and basically in vain? Is it just maybe a hint on a failure of our information policy or something?
Oh, I cannot be 100% sure. It
No, I'm
is
just
possible.
asking for your impression, because you are much more like, you know, in the business of making good assessments and assumption about that.
We see that the country's information policy can change over time. It's changing all the time, not just in Ukraine, but all over the world. And states used to blame media for incorrect coverage or prejudice coverage. Like, media suffer from this all the time. But I don't think that someone choose to be secretive just because of media. They have, because if journalists want to learn something, they will get to it. They will find information.
Okay, that's the spirit. Okay.
I'm talking about investigative journalism,
Yeah.
which is pretty decent in Ukraine and in the US. So yeah, I don't know why Ukraine in particular, I don't know for sure why Ukraine in particular decided not to share. Of course, during the war, the information policy is different, and the less you know, the better, because the enemy also knows less. Maybe it will change in the future. We just have to wait. Yeah. I don't know if it's a satisfying answer for you.
Oh, it is.
Okay.
It is. Thank you.
Do you have like any policies, right? If something sensitive that you feel that it's, you know, kind of too early to disclose, right, or can hurt, right, by publishing this, right? Can you stop an article at this point if you in possession of very valuable information, or it's sensitive one?
Oh no, let's put it like that. What one needs to do in order for you to stop material from going public?
Yeah.
Oh, really? It's a really interesting topic, Alex. Thank you for touching on that. Do you do you blow like friendly operations if you see the factuals that can? Whoa! I got light. That's good. I will jump on my Wi-Fi now. Yeah, so the question is there maybe any like preference of disclosing what's going on if it originates from the axis of evil in comparison to what's going on when it comes from like more legitimate and responsible sources?
Oh, I'm not Edward Snowden to make this moral judgments. Usually it's much simpler. For instance, if I report about Ukraine and I know what power station was attacked, but I'm warned by my sources that I cannot disclose the location, and I won't disclose it because I can describe the attack without mentioning where this power station is located. And it makes sense because this is sensitive and it can be attacked again, not just by cyber means, but also by kinetic means. If I'm interviewing hacker or hacktivists and I know where he or she are located, what their actual names are, but they want to stay anonymous for, again, security reason, I will appreciate their privacy. This is all usually discussed in advance before publishing the story. And there are like certain standards in journalism about the kind of information you can disclose and you cannot disclose, depending on what impact it can have on people you are reporting about. So usually all you have to do is just follow the standards and stay professional. Lat, are you still with us? Because it looks like he's frozen.
Lat is switching internet, so let's see whether Zoom will survive this. So in cybersecurity reporting, right, do you also value a traffic light protocol? Like if you have something like TLP read, document shared, so it's also common practice, right?
Yeah, we have these protocols.
Okay. Cool. Let's see. I do have several, or maybe actually, yeah. So these topics that we just now you mentioned, right? That you may be interviewing hackers, right? Are any kind of suggestion about opsac, right? Operational security procedures that you use and maybe you can recommend to journalists? For example, using Telegram, right, or using Signal, so something like that.
Well, it's all the basics, and not just for journalists, but for everyone who wants to stay safe online. Use complicated passwords. Do not reuse them. Use password managers if possible. Set up two-factor authentication everywhere. For journalists, if it's possible, it's better to use work laptop if their employer issue them one with all the security setups in place. Use VPN. Use encrypted messengers like Signal is the best option. Make your personal social media accounts private, because if you publish a lot of your private stuff online, you have to choose the people you want to show it to. So it's better not to give hackers or people who want to abuse your privacy too much information about you, so they can use this information against you.
Yeah, makes sense. I do have several questions. So let's see. Okay, yeah, so what is still connecting? I want to come back a little bit, and actually I have like two questions, right? So one thing your kind of description, right? Your bio says that you also write about cybersecurity startups, right? And I guess, right now everything is about more cyber warfare and cyber attacks. But any kind of fascinating story, right, about these cybersecurity startups in Ukraine that you can share with us, right? Anything off the top of your head?
Now I have to update my bio. It's from the pre-war times when I wrote about cybersecurity startups. Now I rarely write about them because there are not so many of them. We have like companies, but not startups. Most of the startups in Ukraine went into defense industry, like drone or hardware stuff. So yeah, no stories to share, sorry. Maybe in the future, or maybe someone will listen to your episode and will go to me to share their story.
Yeah,
I'm
it
almost
makes
certain
sense.
that after the war we will have something for you to report on for a few years at least.
You're cooking some startup
going on.
There are startups. They're not really public.
Yeah.
Nowadays.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, correct. It does.
Okay, then the second question, right, that I had around this topic. So in the very beginning, right, like of this interview, you mentioned that kind of you got fascinated about cybersecurity, maybe from scientific fiction, right? All these books. So, Edian, can you say that, are you still fascinated about that when reporting real life cybersecurity? Yeah.
Yeah,
there's like when people get to cybersecurity conferences, get drunk enough to share their like stories from younger ages, we have like a game just comparing the exact moment when we decided that that's a fun thing to do, and normally it comes from culture, and you just you hear or you say how you decided that maybe hacking is fun, what particular episode in a movie or in a book or something you read or watched or heard about, and it came to you, and then you compare how compare all these facts in terms how lame they are, because it's quite it's serious people like with degrees are telling you that in that exact moment when, I don't know, I saw Angelina Jolie in Hackers, I decided that yeah, that's the path I will take. Oh man, come on. It couldn't be that. It was. So what was your opening moment?
I think it all comes down to that podcast, Darknet Diaries, and I think it was several episodes. One about Pegasus spyware. I was like fascinated by spyware industry. It never occurred to me that someone can get into my phone and listen to everything, and like just the concept of spyware, and because it was developed by Israel company, I was like, wow. Another episode, I think it was about Petya, as simple as that, just because it was about Ukraine. So I don't have like a great story with Angelina Jolie involved. It was mostly podcasts and books.
But podcast is a form of art as well, especially when it comes to this one. It's quite well produced, and the author is a good storyteller, I must admit.
And as for science fiction, as you get to know people in the industry, and when you read like cyber research, you see so many references to like characters or plots in science fiction books. Like sometimes even the name of malware can come from science fiction. And during the cyber conferences, especially, I've never visited them, but I saw pictures from there from my colleagues, like DEF CON or Black Hat. You see like people go in with these small screens which look like some from video games or from science fiction books. So a lot of people in the industry are either into video games or science fiction or something from that, or both. Yeah. I'm into podcasts because I'm Gen Z, and like people of my generation don't really read science fiction.
But yeah, before you, there were just a bunch of nerds.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. We have to live with that. Nothing bad in it.
My generation have TikTok.
I'm sorry. No, I tried twice. I even got my daughter to like sit and explain to me what I must do in order for it to make any sense. But I just dropped the idea, because when she just demonstrated how like a simple video just shot like out of nothing, some stuff put on the table and then some light, and then it just goes viral, and I see the counters. Okay, it's just magic. Sorry, I don't want to get into it anytime soon. Can you do it for me? Like that. No, Daddy, I have other stuff to do. Yeah, that's there is a cultural chasm between the generations, but I'm really fascinated how people growing up, like younger people, still maintain this genuine interest and curiosity about this stuff. So it means like we are not getting much closer in I don't know, in it doesn't get any more trivial by day, because it looks like still good stories come out of cyber incidents and cyber operations and all these crazy things happening in the field. Good to know.
Maybe because when you were growing up, all of this seemed like science fiction to you, and now it's our reality. So we have different approach.
Believe me, it didn't. It
Really?
didn't. It all goes in circles. Today, I just going off the record, no pun intended. So we spent some time with my younger kid writing an Apple script, just 2 pages long Apple script code for him to basically automate some stuff on Roblox. So yeah, that's not like too much fun, but it's practical, and it like discloses some particularities of the tradecraft, to him, so he can just, I don't know, maybe read through the code and see some meaningful phrases that translate to what he can understand already, or he can just jump to ChatGPT and ask him to to explain what's going on. That's what he usually does, actually. So I spent some time to fix the code that he generated with an LLM. Being 11 years old.
Wow.
I didn't spend too much time. So the code was already there. I just tweaked some techniques for it to be less buggy. Yeah, so lag less. That's it. I didn't like rewrite it from scratch. I just changed it. So the fun thing is that's basically what we used to do in early 2000s. Again, like something related to gaming industry, automating some things, seeing what's going on, what bugs pop up, and then maybe using them in certain ways, and in this way paving our way into what later has become known as application security. Not many of us were like lucky enough to make this way, following this route. Many of us were experimenting with other things and were stopped much much sooner when we did, because going into the criminal underground wasn't hard. What can I say? So I'm glad to see that this fascination of a younger person nowadays, in the middle of all these TikToks and Instagrams and all this stuff going on, it's still there. So this stuff is still cool. He's like generally surprised that we did well and this code now works and I'm his hero, and he is like super happy that he just achieved something with a little help. So yeah, maybe that's the field that's here for longer than I expected. Maybe it will inspire a generation or two more.
Let's hope.
Yeah, so we're out of time, and I'm really happy we had this conversation. I thought about it for a very long time, and finally Alex arranged it, and I hope it will be as pleasant to listen to and watch as it was for us to take part in it. Thank you for spending this time with us, and thank you for the great job you do, for the awesome work that you produce, and I hope that that's not the last time, and I sincerely hope that with the success of your pieces, there is something coming up in the near future. Maybe after our victory, the first person insight of what was going on for all these years, in a form of a book, maybe, or a little bit longer podcast. Who knows?
Well, I'm definitely thinking about a book, maybe in the future. I'm 23 right now, so I have a lot of years ahead of me to gain more experience. Not to have imposter syndrome about writing a book, but yeah, definitely sometime. And thanks for inviting me. It was fun. It was a pleasure talking to you.